Hey everyone, I'm Harvest Build Destroy, and in this video I'm going to talk about a neat little game I picked up during the Steam Winter Sale called Circle Empires. Circle Empires came out in 2018 and was developed by a company called Luminous. It's a fun, fast-paced little indie RTS quite unlike anything I've ever played before. Aspects of it remind me of Northgard, Ancestors Legacy, and tower defense games, but it still bears the hallmarks of traditional RTS. You harvest resources, build a base and army, and destroy your opponents. But as its name implies, the game's maps consist of circles, which are a bit like territories in Northgard. Each circle contains resources for you to harvest, and circles not controlled by you or the AI will initially be occupied by neutral creeps. Simply enough, in order to capture additional circles, you just have to defeat whatever enemy or neutral units may currently be inside them. Circles not controlled by you show a number which indicates the approximate total power of the units inside. You have complete vision of any circle that is adjacent to a circle you currently control. When you clear the circle of hostiles, it instantly becomes yours, and a storehouse building will spawn, which is a drop-off point for resources. The game's economy features 3 resources, food, wood, and gold, whose functions roughly correspond to their Age of Empires counterparts. Food is mostly for units and upgrades, wood is for buildings, upgrades, and archer-type units, and gold is your more valuable tech resource. You gather resources using worker units, who do so automatically until all resources in the circle have been exhausted, at which point they go idle until you tell them to do something else. Your starting circle generally has both food and wood in it, but circles you find out on the map may have any combination of resources. Gold is generally the rarest resource to actually find on the map, but you can also build banks to generate gold automatically, which cost both food and wood just like with the Dutch in Age of Empires 3. Individual resource nodes run out, but also periodically respawn, so there is theoretically an optimal number of workers to have in a given circle depending on its resource allocation. Wood seems to take the longest to run out, and if your food runs out first, you can spend wood to plant pumpkin patches, which can be harvested immediately, but whose stockpiles increase over time like herdable animals in Age of Mythology or Age of Empires 3. To make units, you click on their portraits at the top of the screen, and then click anywhere inside of a circle you control. As long as you have the resources, the unit spawns instantly. Buildings are built in the same way, and upgrades are researched with a single click. There are 2 pages of units, buildings, and upgrades which you can cycle through by pressing the E key. There are no tech tree requirements for your standard units either. There are special buildings that unlock the ability to make special units and power-ups, but for the bread and butter units that make up the majority of your army, earlier and later game units are only differentiated by their cost. All upgrades contain numerous levels with increasing cost each time, so you always have to decide whether to invest in a larger number of lower tier units, a smaller number of higher tier units, or upgrades, based on how many circles and workers you have. Units and buildings are controlled in the way you would expect in an RTS, using the left mouse button to select and the right mouse button to move or attack. However, there are some basic control features missing. There are no hotkeys for any of the units or upgrades. You have to click the icons every single time. While you can double-click, you can't control-click to select all units of one type. This is unfortunate, as the units move pretty quickly and can be a pain in the ass to double-click. Thankfully though, the game does feature Easy Drag Military Select. If you drag a box around a group of both workers and military units, it will only select the military units. This isn't always a good thing in RTS, but it is in this case. Your workers govern themselves pretty efficiently, and you almost never want to manually give them orders. There's also no attack move, as the A key along with W, S, and D are used to move the camera. You can also pan the camera by moving the mouse to the edge of the screen like normal, but only if you manually enable it in the options menu. Fortunately, however, you can assign control groups using control and the number keys as normal, and the game also features a Supreme Commander style zoom, which can zoom out quite far. These are pretty essential in the later stages of the game in my experience, when you may control as many as 15 or 20 circles. There's no mini-map, so these are the best ways of getting around the map quickly. There's also an attack notification that pops up whenever a circle you're not currently looking at is under attack, which you can click to automatically move the camera to that location. You can micro your units, but for the most part they seem to find targets pretty well on their own. Most of the time you're just focus firing key targets like buildings or very large endgame units. As I mentioned before, the same goes for workers. You can manually task them to gather specific resources, but usually they do it pretty well automatically. Once in a while you might have to manually task them in circles with more than one resource, but not usually. Before you start a game, you have to pick a leader, which is basically your race, civilization, or faction, and each has a unique set of units and bonuses, although there is quite a lot of overlap. Most factions have most of the same units, but some of them do play pretty differently. For instance, there's one faction whose units mostly consist of mermen and frogs who get a speed boost in circles containing water. Another consists entirely of pumpkin units, including spellcasters that can turn your pumpkin patches into pumpkin warriors. I would say that Circle Empires is at around the same point on the factional symmetry spectrum as Age of Empires 3 when it comes to units, and the factional bonuses are comparable to Age games or Northgard. Most of the time you start with some bonus resources or units, or get some kind of bonus every time you capture a circle, such as free towers, units, or mushrooms. Oh, and mushrooms are basically in-game power-ups. You destroy them and get some kind of bonus depending on the type of mushroom, like healing or a free unit. As I alluded to earlier, you have to build a special building to be able to build your own mushrooms, but you also sometimes find them in circles you capture. In my experience, one of the more effective tactics is to build and destroy healing mushrooms with ranged units from within a circle you control as your units lose health while attacking an enemy circle from range. After you pick your faction, you have to choose one of 3 game modes. The first is Monster Hunt, which is pretty much what its name implies. Somewhere on the map is a unique monster that you have to find and kill. Killing a monster unlocks a new one for you to hunt, and this is the closest thing that Circle Empires has to a story mode or campaign. It doesn't really feel like one though, as there's little to no story involved. Aside from Monster Hunt, you have Full Conquest and Imperial Conflict. In Full Conquest mode, you have to conquer every circle on the map. There won't be a proper AI in this mode, just a bunch of non-unified neutral creeps who will be fairly limited in their aggression. Nonetheless, they can be fairly difficult if you turn the difficulty setting up. In Imperial Conflict mode, on the other hand, you do face off against proper AI-controlled players. It's basically your standard skirmish mode, whereas Full Conquest is a bit more like a sandbox mode with a victory condition. For both of these modes, you choose the number of circles on the map, as well as the difficulty, and for Imperial Conflict, you also have to choose the number of AI players, up to 3. While I've really enjoyed what I've played of Circle Empires, the rather limited selection of game modes is probably my biggest gripe with it. Circle Empires is both light and heavy on content at the same time. There are lots of different factions to play, with tons of different units and bonuses to sink your teeth into, but the game modes themselves leave something to be desired. You don't really get the opportunity to make use of all the different factions in interesting or creative ways, since the campaign mode is lacking if you even want to think of Monster Hunt as a sort of campaign, and there's no multiplayer. There is, however, a multiplayer version of the game called Circle Empires Rivals that's set to be released early this year. It's currently in open beta, so you can sign up and check it out for yourself if you want. I haven't played it yet myself, but I certainly plan to cover it on the channel when it comes out. But as it stands, Circle Empires itself is a bit light on content in terms of game modes, which limits its replay value even if there are a lot of leaders to try out. There is, however, a DLC that adds 6 leaders and 12 monsters, bringing the totals up to 24 leaders and 24 monsters, and it costs about the same as a cup of coffee, so if you're planning on buying the game at all, there's really no reason not to get it. But it doesn't add anything fundamentally new, just more of what's already there. It's a welcome addition, but doesn't patch up what I perceive to be the biggest problem with the game. After playing Circle Empires for a while, it felt to me like a really well done Flash game that was just sort of ported over to Steam, and well, it turns out that's exactly what it was. Emphasis on the really well done part though. Despite my gripes with it, the game is a lot of fun to play. But I do have a few other issues with it. The AI difficulty doesn't scale very well. It goes from too easy to too hard pretty abruptly. On the harder difficulties, it can be tricky to take your second circle in a reasonable amount of time. It's also frequently difficult to tell whose units are whose in a larger battle. I think the units could be better differentiated by color. I could imagine this being a much bigger problem in Circle Empires Rivals, where you'll often have a larger number of players. I'll reserve judgment on that until I play the final version of the game though. On a similar note, the fact that units spawn instantly seems like something that will lead to a lot of strange scenarios in multiplayer. If you don't spend your resources, you can spawn a vast army instantly, and I'm curious to see how this pans out in multiplayer with players who know what they're doing, or if they'll end up adding a short spawn cooldown or something like that to compensate. As it stands, it sometimes feels a bit like you're punished for spending your resources as you get them like you would in a standard RTS. But that's about all I have to say about Circle Empires for now. It's a unique experience and a lot of fun to play, at least for a while. It's really cheap on Steam and often goes on sale for 50% off, so check it out. But that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, subscribe, hit the bell, and all that. See you soon.